Okay, welcome back to our kitchen table. We are just picking up from where we left off with the first episode with our JPL team. These are some of the extra questions we received after the fact, during the break, but unfortunately we couldn't answer all of them. So I'm very grateful for the team to be back, and even through Zoom. Thank you for taking time off your busy schedule and, regroup now, right? So I'm going to, not to take too much of your time. So reading questions one after the other. The first one for all of you. What is your opinion on the movie Contact? And I hope everybody knows this movie, Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey, right? Like, back in the day, it was a very popular movie. I know Matthew McConaughey was a reverend. He was a theologian or something like that. Yes, yeah. Anybody?
Okay, I'll start.
Sure.
I love that movie mostly because I think Matthew McConaughey is really attractive. That's about it. Okay, the whole premise of the movie, I'm not gonna lie, it's a little out there, but that's why I like sci-fis, because they're out there. If they try too hard to make it realistic, like there's a couple of TV shows that try to show you what it's like on the space station, and they totally mess it up. That bothers me. So I'd rather be like way wacky out there, like there's these aliens and they want us to build this random spaceship and it breaks the space-time continuum. That's totally fine with me, because yeah, it's really out there. But I think it's also good because it shows you how graduate students get taken advantage of, and the other people get credit for their work. That happens a lot.
So I like it because I've been to the SETI Institute, right? And SETI, is one of the partners that's in the movie doing the search for extraterrestrial life. And so it's been fun for me to get to know those guys. Of course, that is a theological question as to whether or not there is life out there, and whether we would make contact with such life. And I think we believe in God's intelligent design, but I think it's been fun for me to go and kind of see what we do at that institute.
I think it was based on Carl Sagan's book or something, right? Like, do you have any opinion on Carl Sagan? I know it's a slight off track, but just wondering. He has influenced popular culture in the area of what you do.
I think a lot of people don't know Carl Sagan influenced Voyager. Maybe Mike knows more about that.
Huh.
Well, I was just going to say, Carl Sagan certainly popularized a lot of astronomy, got a lot of people interested in it. And he presented what we understood. So that's a really good thing. And I have to confess, I actually haven't seen the movie Contact, so I can't answer that question.
Nor have I. I have not seen it either.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it raises a lot of questions, not just about space, eternity, how does time disappear? Anyway, it's a very interesting movie to watch for you guys. And it's a little.
I'll have to see it sometime, just so I can bring it up in conversation and maybe use it as a way to talk about spiritual things with people.
Okay.
You can also talk about Deep Space Network with that movie. And all the dishes.
And I think you guys can correct me, but I think they put this golden record on Voyager.
That's right.
And I think Carl Sagan helped influence what went on there, and
he did
things that
was his project,
right? That people found Voyager somewhere out in the edge of the solar system, they could actually understand human life in life in civilization on the Earth. So
yeah, and that was before the movie Contact. But Carl Sagan, he put, how do you tell people what that record is if it's an alien civilization? So he put it in mathematical terms, how to play the record, and it's in mathematical terms on the cover of it. And I know that there's at least babies crying on there and Johnny Be Good. I don't remember the rest. There's a lot of random stuff on there, and Carl Sagan, that was his like pet project.
Yeah.
Which is very similar to kind of the Contact movie concept of like, how do you describe what you are to another civilization?
Okay, let me go to the next. It's funny. The next question is about the Big Bang Theory. Big Bang Theory, not the show. It's funny. We're talking about a show, and here is another show. In some way, before coming to Pasadena, my understanding of Caltech was shaped by the show Big Bang Theory. Don't tell me you haven't watched it, at least one episode, right? But thankfully, nobody has asked about the TV show. But this is the question. The Big Bang Theory suggests there was a creator. Do your JPL colleagues believe there was a creator?
So I want to argue with the first part of that statement a little bit. The Big Bang actually suggests there was a beginning, not necessarily a creator. But even that idea is actually unpleasant to some people. The kind of interesting thing is when the Big Bang Theory was first presented, it actually sounded too much like the book of Genesis. And some of the scientists who were the early proponents of the idea were actually derided as belonging to the first church of the Big Bang. So, you know, to be fair, let there be light sounds an awful lot like a Big Bang. So, you know, kind of understand, but, you know, certainly the Big Bang suggests there was a beginning. And, you know, I'm not sure I would take that to the, you know, suggesting there was a creator necessarily. I mean, obviously we believe that's the prime cause of the Big Bang, but, you know, it's certainly a beginning, and that has a lot of implications, you know, when you think about the universe.
I'm interested to know, Mike, if your colleagues, I'm sure most of them don't believe in a creator, right?
You know, but some do. You know, it's kind of interesting. You know, when we talked about this in the in-person meeting, I mentioned, you know, some are opposed to the idea, some actually think there is too, and some just don't care. And so, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, sure, probably the majority don't believe there's a God and don't have any room for a creator, but at least from my perception, more than you might expect actually do. So that's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah, it's a reflection of society, right?
Yeah, it is in a lot of ways. And, you know, people that don't want to believe in a creator aren't going to believe in a creator no matter what you tell them. They don't have to be scientists to be in that position.
Right.
I'm going to read out the next question. You almost answered this question, but you know, it's going to theoretical physics here a little bit. Do you see a correlation between string theory, Big Bang theory, and God speaking creation into existence?
So
yeah.
Let me dispense with the string theory first. That is truly a theory. It's an idea that people are desperately trying to find data that support it. And I'll leave it to the people who are involved day to day to decide whether they actually have, you know, yeah. But, you know, Big Bang theory is well supported by evidence. You know, it describes many of the features that we see in the universe. And again, it does sound an awful lot like let there be light. So, you know, while one does not need to invoke God to explain the Big Bang, you know, who's to say that that isn't the method that God chose to use to bring the universe into being? And that's why I think it's actually pretty cool that, without stretching things too far, what's written in the book of Genesis actually does kind of sound like that. And I don't want to push it any farther than that, but I just think it's interesting that the language of Genesis evokes what we think happened in, you know, as a result of the Big Bang.
Anybody else want to pitch in, or should I go to the next question?
No, I think Mike did a great job. I mean, I think the thing that fascinates me is that we can actually measure the size of the universe, right? And we can be able to kind of pinpoint when that Big Bang occurred, right? And I think that's, to me, how we see God as well. We talked about, you know, mathematics, but you know, the fact that we've got such structure built into God's creation of the universe is, to me, is just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is like in some of the questions too. There's two good books that come to mind I've read just to wrap my head around a lot of the astrophysics that Mike knows way better than any of us, for sure. And Hugh Ross, More Than a Theory, he talks about this in his book.
Yeah.
and then also Case for a Creator. It's the same author as Case for Christ, but then he goes to the scientists and talks about string theory and all that. Those are great books and resources to talk about these things. And I just want to add, I heard a long time ago from a very good speaker that there's like rib issues, and then there's like spinal cord issues. You can't live without your spinal cord. Those are things like we can all agree that Jesus died for us on the cross, and there's no other way to heaven except through him, through his salvation. It's a free gift. We can't earn it. And then there's the rib issue of like, how did the earth get started? And for me, and probably Mike, I definitely have like a bucket list growing in my brain of like, when I get to heaven, okay, God, how'd you do it? Can you push play and let me watch how it was done? Because honestly, we could all totally disagree on how the world started, how the universe started, and still we can all see each other in heaven on the foundation of our spinal cord issue, which is, salvation through Jesus Christ alone. So those are really good books that helped me kind of figure all that out when I was wrestling with a lot of those questions too, as a scientist.
And I think there's a question about Hugh Ross that I saw on the list too, which I think is, I think his organization, Reasons to Believe, has done, I think, a lot of work to try and look at scientific questions that I think have been able to sort of validate science and faith and bring them together closer. So I think that's been a great resource for, I think, the community.
Yeah, he's done a really good job at bringing the discussion up, and maybe even more so for Christians, show them why their faith is reasonable, using reason. I don't always agree with everything about how he tries to string Genesis 1 with our modern origins theories, but that's okay. Who am I to say he's wrong and I'm right?
Yeah, that's right.
He's right and I'm wrong, whatever. But the point is he actually discusses it very well and gives people enough to evaluate it and think about it, and that's really important.
I'm glad you guys answered the question. That was my next question here. Have you heard of Hugh Ross, and what do you think about his role in the church? You kind of answered that. And the other name I think Lauren was trying to remember was Lee Strobel, right?
Yes,
Case for Creator. Yeah, he has done some great stuff.
Yeah, and Hugh Ross, just to be clear, there's like so many different books out there on creationist theory. So there's like 11 official views within the church of how old the earth is, how it all started, etc. But as far as I know, I think Hugh Ross is the only astrophysicist. And for me, that was important because I'm a geochemist by training. So there's a lot of great arguments out there for age of Earth based on geology. But I'd never heard it told from the perspective of an astrophysicist and taking into account Stephen Hawking's calculations, all of these things which are out there that I had a hard time arguing against. So I think Hugh Ross's role is really important to have that astrophysics, so that you're taking into account all of the other interstellar calculations that are out there and not just looking at geology. You're looking at the whole picture together. So I think that's where he contributes a lot. And then people like us in the church who are scientists don't have to think that we're somehow blaspheming God by studying, the 13.1 billion year old universe that we say we're in, that type of thing.
Then the next question kind of related to this. I don't know how to interpret this question. Probably you'll get it the moment I say it, but it says, how does the scientific method, quotation, show up, or do you use it at work? How does the scientific method affect your relationship with God? Now, I'm not sure how pertinent it is for you're hard scientists like math and physics, because scientific method is quite often used in the social science, which is anyway. So I don't know how you take that question. How does the scientific method show up at your work? I thought, anyway.
So in my area, which is really helping scientists do data analysis and things like that, right? There's always, kind of a hypothesis-driven approach to trying to, see whether we can prove a theory, right? So we very much, even when we fly a mission, and Mike's our science would know this. We put together a set of scientific questions, and then we trace that to measurements, and we bring up that data, and then we use that data to be able to validate kind of our theories. And so, we certainly do that a lot, and provide that. So.
Yeah, and thinking about this one a little bit, the scientific method it's a method for arranging and trying to understand facts. So, you make a bunch of observations, you create a theory that tries to fit those observations, you test it, and then you revise your theory and you do it all over again. And so, it's a way to organize, essentially. And I do use that in my faith too. I see things where it looks like God is at work. I evaluate those things based on what I read in the scripture and, my current understanding of God. And if something needs tuning, then I tune and go back and do it all over again. So, you can really apply the scientific method to your faith as well.
Absolutely.
Our faith is not a random, I believe in the flying spaghetti monster kind of thing. Our faith is grounded in facts. And so, it can be subject to the scientific method just like anything else.
But I think too that the scientific method would not work to discover facts and to figure out how the world works if things weren't repeatable, if things didn't continue as they have, and if the laws of the universe weren't immutable, if that's the way to say it. And I think those point to God.
Absolutely.
They are a reflection of who God is. And so in terms of affecting my relationship with God, it's just discovering who he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I worked in a laboratory for like, I don't know, a decade. And so I definitely used the scientific method all the time, especially in grad school. And, Romans 12 says you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is. Scripture everywhere tells you to not just take things at face value, but to actually test it. Test scripture, test God's word. Don't test God to get a rise out of him, because you don't want that. but the scriptures are very clear that we aren't just to believe whatever we're told. We're supposed to test scripture for ourselves. And that's and that's how God created us.
Yeah.
So I totally agree, Mark. If the laws themselves weren't even set up, there's no way you could even use the scientific method, and that totally points to creator for me as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that clarification, because even I was a little confused about the question, because I've studied math and physics, not up to the level you guys have done, and it assumes a predictability for the natural phenomena. And then you come to, then I did my higher studies was on soft sciences, anthropology and all that. That's where they use scientific method, because they also assume a certain kind of predictability in which way people behave and the culture behave. And that doesn't always work. That's why it's called soft science, right? Because people are not always predictable, even though there is a pattern to it. So there, the scientific method is in question as to very often. And then you apply it to the level of theology, then we are dealing with transcendent phenomenon, right? Like supernatural phenomenon, like virgin birth. That goes all out of your scientific method. So yeah, so the variations of it. And for me, you are all dealing with the actual scientific method as close as you can get, I believe, the physicists and the mathematicians and the engineers. So anyway, so that's why I thought this will be a very very debatable question in a completely different platform. But for you, I know it's great. So let me come to some of the technical.
Matthew, let me leverage this to the question.
Sure.
Why do you think God designed us to want to explore?
Please, yeah.
Because I think that links to this, and certainly my thinking along these lines. That's where I had this thought about Romans 1:20.
Yeah.
And Mike, I know you had some questions, some other verses on this too, where God reveals himself in creation, and we are made to to know and to understand God. And so I think that's why we explore, so we can understand God.
Mhm.
It's just that simple.
Yeah, so I'll try to avoid giving a sermon here, but God made us in his image.
Yeah.
So wouldn't he want us to use the intelligence? God is creative. He created, the universe that we are part of. So wouldn't he want us to explore that and enjoy it? But I did look up a bunch of other Bible verses. So in Psalm 8, it says, when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? So when I look at your heavens, or some translations say, when I consider your heavens, you got to go out and look and explore and try to understand. In God's promise to Abraham in Genesis 15, God brought Abraham outside and said, look toward heaven and number the stars if you are able to number them, count them, go out and look, see what's out there. And Job is one of my favorite books of the Bible. In Job, it says, is not God high in the heavens? See the highest stars, how lofty they are. Well, if you're gonna, you have to look, you have to try to understand how God is above all of that as well. And another really fun was in Job 38. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion, constellations that we know and love? Can you lead forth Mazzaroth? I don't know what that is in their season. Or can you guide the bear with its children? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens, or can you establish their rule on the earth? It's, I love the reference to the constellations, but, do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Do you know the laws of the heavens? If God is going to challenge Job to match his understanding, shouldn't Job try to understand? So these for me is, God is just dialed into us, go explore, go see what he's done. Even one of the Psalms says, taste the Lord and see that he's good. So, even that's an experimental thing. Go see what God has done. So, I think, with the verse that Mark brought up as well, it's just all through the Bible. Go see what God has done. Go test him. Go find out. So yeah, God definitely designed us to explore space.
You are preaching, Mike. I don't know if you
Did a
know
great
this. Our
job.
church is looking for a senior pastor.
Yeah.
No.
We could probably set that up on a Sunday.
I think this is kind of, you're going to the other question too, at least metaphorical sense. I think they were asking more from the scientific. Here's a question. What are the possible implications of learning how stars are formed or how they die? I mean, you're talking about look at the stars and exploring the stars. So I thought this is very interesting.
Yes. So this is probably in reference to some of the images that I showed during the in-person thing. So it's really just part of trying to understand the universe that God made, and understanding how he made it. Stars really are fundamental parts of the universe, from our own star, the sun, to the hundreds of billions of stars in our own galaxy, to the hundreds of billions of galaxies that each have their own 100 billion stars. So, just understanding how they form, how they came to be, and understanding the material that they form from tells us a little bit about what planets around those stars might look like, and in particular what components were available to form the Earth, which led to the life that we have. So it's just one thing in the grand scheme of the universe. And so that's what I enjoy doing. I love poking around and seeing what's out there.
Probably related, the next question is why Mars, with all the adverse conditions, does not seem to be compatible with human life? So you guys want to take on it? And I know you guys are the Mars team.
I thought Lauren would jump on that question.
I was trying to be nice and let you.
Go ahead, Lloyd.
Okay, so Mars is actually really similar to Earth. In fact, it's interesting that like some of the early landers that we put on, even before we landed, the Viking landers, there were theories that there was a magnetic field around Mars, that it had a full atmosphere. And then once we started actually landing on Mars, we found evidence of a former magnetic field, and we found plenty of visual evidence of former lake beds and glaciers and huge bodies of water. And so, you know, this is more of a JPL answer than a Christian answer, but the JPL answer, which is still a good one, is, you know, what happened on Mars and how do we make sure that doesn't happen here? Because, you know, at one point it had an atmosphere and it had the capability to host life. It had a lot of the same ingredients. And, you know, I think a lot of people don't realize that as Christians, we're called to be good stewards of what God's given us. And he gave us this earth. It's clear in Genesis that he put Adam and Eve in charge over all of the creation and told them to take care of it. And I think a big part of that is understanding our own planet, how to take care of it, but also looking outward, look at all of these other planets. And also for me, it's just incredible when you consider, again, I think I remember the statistics that Lee Strobel wrote in Case for Creator of just how likely, really unlikely it is to have life on any planet. That our planet would be just so perfect to be this lush green ocean, vast, capable of hosting life. And then you go just one planet away, just one on either direction, and it's just like desert, completely incapable of any life at this point. Maybe there's some subsurface microbes. That would be super fascinating to me. But, you know, you're not going to have antelopes and zebras and giraffes roaming around and grazing in the fields. And in order for that kind of life to exist, that's just statistically impossible from, you know, the Big Bang theory that we all just talked about. So it's so fascinating to me to explore more of that, understand maybe how better to take care of our planet based on Mars's history, but also to really see just how desolate these other planets are. And how fortunate we should consider ourselves and really blessed. And that, for me, that motivates me to take better care of the planet that we are on. And so, you know, I think a lot of decision making can get about money, can get about politics, but, you know, if we get enough Christians up in, you know, even at the upper echelons, then maybe we could start thinking about how better to take care of the planet. So I that's for me the biggest motivation.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody wants to jump on it, but I'll ask probably a related question. I think you are alluding to this, Lauren. Is the surface of the Mars comparable to the surface of the Earth? And minerals, question mark.
Yeah, so the mineral compositions are extremely similar, with the difference of the interaction that the surface has now with its atmosphere. So Mars' atmosphere is very different than ours. It's just CO2 mostly, versus ours is very oxygen rich. So you get minerals on the surface that are very oxidized here on Earth versus over there, they're not, because you just have a CO2 interaction. But a lot of the same minerals that we see here on Earth that form, that life utilizes, microbes like to live in, we have a lot of that same type of mineral composition on Mars. And we know that because all these people at JPL decided to work really hard and build a couple of things and send them all the way there and actually attach really complicated instruments that can actually detect all the different mineral types. So it's just amazing to me what people have accomplished to learn really exact mineral compositions on Mars that we can directly compare back to Earth. So yeah, the compositions are very similar.
And we should do a hat tip to Lauren, because she was the system engineer on some of those instruments for Mars Perseverance. So it's very close to home for you.
Right now, Lauren, to broaden the question, how about precious metals?
Yeah,
the precious metal distribution is definitely different, and we don't know what it is. For sure, it's different, but I think what I'm thinking of, and if any geo nerds are out there, there's a lot of olivine, pyroxene. Those are basalts that we find here on Earth on the bottom of our ocean. And we know that microbes like to live in those. And so I actually did study Martian meteorites before I came to JPL. And I looked at the Martian meteorites and those compositions. And I looked at how it had all these little microtunnels forming in them that are the same microtunnels you see formed by microbes here on Earth. Very exciting stuff for me. So when I am on ops, I was on a shift today and I'm on another one tomorrow. When I hear science go, oh, that looks like, traces of olivine or pyroxene, I'm secretly like giddy about it, because I know that that's like the really good preserved rock that can host microbial life, and maybe there's evidence of ancient life there, maybe there's fossils in it, and I'm always like, yeah, let's sample that one, but I don't get to make that call.
Yeah,
I did help build the instrument that can sample it, so that was the fun part.
and I'll just say we see pyroxene and olivine in the material where stars are being formed. So there's your connection.
Exactly. So it's so amazing. And I will hat tip to Mike that, we're all stardust eventually, right? The compositions are all based on that periodic table. Somebody set that thing up.
Yep. Right.
Yeah. Well, I really dream a day when you come to church with a rock from Mars, right? So that we can all see it one day.
I actually have a bracelet that has a Martian meteorite in it. Not joking. I could wear it this Sunday.
Why you sing, right?
Okay. So a little more technical question, or more close to the hardware, the question. How do you protect hardware, instrumentation, machinery from extreme cold, hot conditions in space? Good question. Yeah.
Yeah. That's sort of my area too. That we design for it. We know what it's going to be. We know how hot or cold or the other environments, and we just simply design for it. And in a thermal control situation, there's a lot of tricks of the trade, but the most important one is probably white paint. It's just that simple. White paint reflects sunlight, so it doesn't absorb and make things hot, and it does a good job. The right kind of white paint does a good job of radiating heat even in towards the sun, and allows the whole thing to cool down. So that's the basic control. There's other mechanisms too, but white paint is the easiest, and as long as it doesn't peel off, works great.
So I would just like to point out that ultimately that's a materials chemistry problem.
Absolutely. Says the chemical engineer to the chemist.
That's right.
Well, and sometimes we take advantage of the cold conditions in space. A lot of the infrared sensors that I work with need to be cooled to below 40 degrees above absolute zero. So there it's like, hey, we just let it all radiate into space. We don't need to provide any coolant or a cooler. So it makes our missions cheaper. The fact that we just let it cool down, close to absolute zero, just sitting in space. So it can be an advantage.
Yeah. Mike, while you're at it, I think here is a question specifically for you. Your hope, what will JWST, which stands for James Webb Space Telescope, right? Show us about the universe that Hubble hasn't. One more question. Well, it's kind of different, but sorry, I should have asked this first, but why are the mirrors on the JWST gold in color? Wouldn't that affect how the pictures come about? Sorry, that's
okay,
two different questions.
So Mike, you got to be careful predicting what science we're going to get from something we haven't done yet. We should write this down and see how right you are.
I'll answer the second question first.
Yeah.
JWST uses gold-coated mirrors because gold is actually very highly reflected at infrared wavelengths, which is where JWST, or the Webb telescope, primarily works. If our eyes were sensitive to infrared wavelengths instead of the visible wavelengths, gold would actually be very, very bright white. It's just a really good reflector in the infrared. And in terms of affecting the pictures, since Webb works at infrared wavelengths that our eyes can't see, we have to use tricks to make images, to make pictures that look like something. So what we'll do is we'll take images at 3 different infrared wavelengths and then assign one wavelength to red, one wavelength to green, and another blue, and thus make a picture that our brain can understand. If you remember from the in-person talk, I showed a picture of a dusty region that's forming very young stars. You couldn't see those at visible wavelengths. You can see them at infrared wavelengths. But to do that picture, I did exactly that technique. I took 3 different infrared wavelength images and converted them to red, green, and blue. And that's what you saw on the screen. So the gold color actually is exactly what we want. The reason gold is reddish colored is because it doesn't reflect blue very well. So if you used it for a visible wavelength telescope, yeah, everything would be all messed up. But in the infrared, it's the best material. And then what do I hope JWST shows us? So I'm going to answer this for myself. I'm not going to try to predict all of science that will be done. But I've talked about it a zillion times already. I'm interested in how stars form. At visible wavelengths that Hubble observes the universe with, we can't see down into the densest part of those dust clouds where the truly baby stars are. Webb telescope can. So we'll be able to see the stars as they're first starting to glow. We'll be able to see what elements and molecules are part of that dust cloud. We can see pyroxene and olivine sometimes. But we see a lot of methane and water ice and carbon dioxide ice and so forth. And so we'll be able to better see what that initial soup is that the stars are forming from. So in this case, the Webb telescope is very much complementary and extends what Hubble can tell us. And so, whenever you look at the universe with a new set of eyes, different techniques, you always find lots of good stuff. So there are many other things that we hope Webb will tell us that Hubble hasn't been able to, but that's what I'm going for.
Okay, here's one specifically for you, Dan. What AI, artificial intelligence learning takes place in the Mars expedition? How much reasoning and decision-making on Mars is AI?
Good question. We've seen for each generation of rovers, we've seen more and more advanced capabilities in these areas. Now, the big challenge we have with our rovers is that the kinds of CPU and memory capabilities we have on there, because the radiation environment is very limited. So we still fly 1990s technology, which means that we can't do a lot of heavy computation, which is required with AI on board. So most of the learning or training we do on models to train a piece of software occurs on the ground, and then we upload that model to the spacecraft. So we can do things like a dust storm, look for transient events as they're moving across the surface of Mars. We can do things like surface operations with autonomy. So there's more and more distance we can now drive a rover. Our Ingenuity helicopter was more autonomous and things like that. So it has capabilities built into that. But I think that for this mission, the by far the coolest thing it did, sort of like your Tesla, right? It had the ability to provide some intelligence as it was landing, to be able to find in a very, very crowded space of lots and lots of obstacles, the best place to set down. And it was using a model that had trained from some other imagery and things that we got from Mars to be able to help us land safely on Mars. And I think that, so you can imagine us using the same kind of capabilities that are going into, say, self-driving cars on Mars, on some of our rovers itself. So
cool.
Dan, I thought you were going to say you are a robot.
That could be true too. Some people believe that. So
the real Dan is cooking in the
right.
kitchen.
I've been trying to figure out that cloning opportunity. Yes.
That's a good one. So one more technical question. I think it is Lauren or Mark. I don't know how this is. It says, how were the sample cores drilled and collected? A normal drill would certainly only create a hollow core within the stone. So how exactly was it possible to extract a core-shaped sample? Interesting.
Okay, I'll tackle this because I did
Yes, you did
design. I
What's
did
your area?
the sample caching system. Right. So actually, I think when I was an undergrad, I went tree coring with a bunch of geography people in the geography department. And it's really simple. Actually, you literally just have to rotate and apply force. This is what I did on a tree, and I had a little handheld. I did it by hand, and I would literally, you think of a hollow tube, and you rotate it at the same time that you push on it into a tree, and then it has kind of a little clocking that kind of eccentric. So it starts like this, it kind of goes like that, that kind of cuts off the core, and then you just pull it out and you have an intact core. So same principle, just beefed up. You can actually go to Home Depot, buy yourself a rotary, it's called a rotary percussive drill, that is capable of collecting cores. A lot of the scientists on Mars 2020, they go out into the field with little handheld drilling rotary percussive mechanisms that have basically the same size almost of coring bits. And so it really is just a hollow, very solid material, and it does a rotation and a force. So it's percussing. So the way you do it in a rock to get something really dense is you rotate at a really high speed and you percuss at really high force. But the same thing exists. We actually have on the sample caching system, we have a coring bit, and that bit is sort of a hollow large tube, and then the tube itself, the sample tube, sits inside of that. And we have a little core break lockout mechanism that, once we're done coring into the rock, it literally just rotates eccentrically and cuts off the core at the bottom, holds it in place. You pull it out. It works great, I promise. Okay, our first one was a little rough, but the next two worked great. So that's kind of the basic principle of it. And then you get really fancy with just the mechanisms and the motors that go into that, and really how much force you need to use. Fun enough, I think drilled probably close to 10,000 cores or something crazy like that in the test bed at JPL. So we have like a whole Mars yard where we practice doing this, and we have a whole test bed. Actually, we have probably 3 or 4 test beds technically on lab that are filled with dirt, and literally a bunch of geologists go out to Death Valley, and they grab a bunch of rocks of various densities, abrasiveness, things that we know exist on Mars based on the mineralogy that we've already learned from all of our other landers and rovers. And we bring them back into the lab, and we just do tons of coring experiment. We core, we abrade, we core, we abrade. And we even have requirements on making sure that core is intact, that it doesn't powderize and break apart. And so we've done that so many times in the test bed that we actually know with pretty good precision how much force and how much frequency, the frequency that we should use and the force that we should use. And so we can tune that to the rock that we're about to sample, and that's what we do in operations. And the way we get to know that is because we designed the sample caching system to be able to do science first. So we actually abrade a little patch on a rock first. We stick 2 instruments on it and let them just check it out, and they can actually tell you the mineralogy of the rock. That's Sherlock and Pixel, and even SuperCam on the mast of the RSM. And all 3 of those in combination with a bunch of great imagery, we usually get a very good idea of what that rock's made out of. And then we can decide to core it, and then we kind of know about what density to expect and what frequency and percussive force to use. And so we can fine tune it in ops for that. And that's sort of the frequency you'll see as we start doing more and more sampling on Mars. You'll see abrasion, you'll see science, and then you'll see cores coming out. It's pretty cool.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. I thought she'd just tell us to use a hollow bit, but a little bit more detailed.
Yeah.
Hey, I helped design it. What do you expect?
It's the passion.
Matthew, there's a question about getting hardware, the products from Europe instead of America.
So I was going to say that my next
Yeah.
set of questions are a little tricky and kind of an international nature. Yeah, jump at it. Yeah.
Yeah, let me leverage that, because the
Yeah.
motors that Lauren's talking about, we bought from Switzerland.
Yeah, can
And,
you read that? Or can I read that question?
Yeah,
before?
go ahead.
Because,
Go ahead.
are most part of JPL projects, particularly for the projects to Mars, made by European companies? Is it that American companies have no abilities to make them on our own?
Yeah, I may have left the impression that when we were in person that we bought a lot of stuff from Europe, but we bought some stuff from Europe. We had contributions from Europe, but as a measure of the ratio of what we bought in the United States versus Europe, my team, which does the quality assurance, visited 23 states to make sure we were buying the right quality hardware, but only 5 places in Europe. So we were very heavy in purchasing and using United States capabilities. But we wanted to get the best in the world, and some of that's not always in the United States. So those motors that we got that Lauren was talking about are high quality motors, but we still had to help them be better motors so they could work right on Mars, where the conditions are different.
Yeah,
But a lot of it's made in like the majority of the rover was made.
much, yeah.
Actually, the majority of the rover was like made at JPL. Like in-house, and then we outsourced some things for, whatever we needed to do. Sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's fine, because I was, on my instrument that'll fly in the Webb telescope, there it was just a decision at the beginning, agreement, who's going to do this, who wants to do that. And so in our case, the European contribution was the optical system. The JPL contribution was the detector system. And it wasn't because they're better at optics than we are necessarily, although they're really, really good. But it was just, let's do it that way. We'll do this part, you do that part, and hopefully in the end, we all go home happy.
Yeah, and that's true of the next mission, the sample return. There's definitely international collaboration happening. And
Absolutely.
Obviously some of our instruments on Mars 2020, those are international collaborations. No doubt. SuperCam is in France, Meta is in Spain. And it's really fun in ops now because those people call in from all over the world to operate their instrument on Mars, and you get the awesome French accent and the really awesome Spanish accent. And it's really truly amazing to hear all the different people. And you're going to have the same thing on MSR. I think the latest is that actually European Space Agency might be building the rover for the Fetch rover, right?
They're building the Fetch rover. People in Alabama are building the rocket to lift it off of Mars, and the European Space Agency will build the spacecraft that'll bring it all back to Earth, and the United States is building essentially everything else, which is almost everything, except those big items.
Talking about the international collaboration, the next question is, I don't know if you want to answer, how you want to answer it. Why China and Russia are not part of the International Space Station? Is it fear? Now, is China's space station weaponized? Is China's International Space Agency in communication with international space community? I don't know if you want to answer it or.
Well, I tell you, but I'd have to kill you. Здравствуйте, меня зовут Lauren. Okay, just kidding. Actually, Russia is part of the space station.
It is,
I don't. So I'm going to correct that. The International Space Station was already originally conceived as a collaboration between Russia and the United States primarily. There's also Canadian-built hardware and Japanese-built hardware on board. And then you have experiments from all over the world now up there. But Russia is like the main partner. In fact, when we retired the space shuttle, and I used to work in mission control at Johnson Space Center during the space shuttle days. When we retired that space shuttle, the only way for the United States astronauts to get to the space station was on a Soyuz capsule. So if you became an astronaut after we retired the shuttle in 2008, I think it was, then you
And
needed to learn some Russian because
Right,
you would
that's right.
spend, almost 3 years of your life training in Kazakhstan. And if you meet any of the astronauts currently in the core, a great group of people, most of them speak pretty fluent Russian. It was kind of part of the gig. So yeah, actually a big portion of the space station is Russia. And I know a little bit about the China because I did look into this a little bit in grad school, and I'm sure other people can speak to this, but I will say China is organized differently. Obviously, their government's a little different than ours, and their space program is a direct branch of its military. And so that is actually the primary reason why NASA does not collaborate directly with China, because it's a military operation. And so we don't really cross those lines. If it were a separate governmental branch, sort of like how we have it here, maybe that'd be a different story. And then we have, there's probably other reasons, government reasons, why we currently don't collaborate with China on specific things, but there's no well, we know it's weaponized, I don't think I'm not privy to those secrets, but I do know that the main reason NASA doesn't do that collaboration is because of its status as a military operation. It's all controlled by the Chinese Academy of Sciences ultimately, and so that's all technically part of the military. Even when you do research in their laboratories, which I spent 3 months in Suzhou Institute doing nanotechnology research for the Chinese Academy of Sciences. I was technically working for their military. If you think about it, it's very interesting how it's all set up. So everything I did was dictated directly from the Chinese Academy of Sciences. My schedule every day was operated by them. I was always at the mercy of whatever they dictated to me. So it was very different than how we operate over here.
So I did a little digging too, and it's actually by 2011 law that Congress prohibited NASA from funding any bilateral efforts with China. So it's not that China, or it's not that NASA decided that we're not going to do it. It's actually, a congressional law that prohibits us from doing that. Hopefully that changes someday, but the Chinese space station is still an international effort. There is European involvement, maybe even a little bit of Russian involvement, at least some of the early training and so forth. So they're not completely going it alone. It's just our political environment makes it difficult for us to do anything in collaboration with them.
Yeah, that was difficult for a lot of NASA research scientists, by the way, when I remember that town hall, because a lot of people, including myself, I was doing like collaborative just science research in a laboratory with some of those people, and we were prohibited from doing so per that law. So it changed a lot of things.
While we are at China, one more question on the same, a little more technical. I think this is interesting. So I'll read it out. China launched their Mars mission in 2020, which consisted of an orbiter, a lander, and a rover that sat on top of the lander. My question, why did JPL choose to use the sky crane system? It seems to me that the risks of a lander that carried the rover would be safer. Were there underlying technical or physical limits? I know the kid who asked this question. You probably should interview him. So,
well, I mean, I'm sure my colleagues can answer more of this, but as we've gone through generations of Mars rovers, right? I mean, mass is really one of the big challenges we have when we land on Mars, right? So Sky Crane turned out to be a solution to figure out how do we deliver larger and larger rovers onto the surface of the planet. So yeah, I think it was a crazy notion in the beginning, but turned out to actually be pretty ingenious in the end, so.
Right, and of course we have many generations now of different kinds of landers, and
Right.
Sky Crane's been used twice.
Yeah.
We landed Pathfinder and then 2 MERs, Curiosity and Spirit. No, Spirit and I forgot the names already.
Opportunity.
Spirit and Opportunity.
Yeah.
Were carried to the surface on landers, and they the rovers rolled off of a platform.
Right.
And of course, way back in 1976, Viking was landed on the surface of Mars after being carried by an orbiter. And then when the orbiter arrived at Mars, they decided where to let it go, and then they landed it that way, as opposed to the ballistic trajectories we use now. So we've used many different options, and I promise you that the architecture team investigates these in great detail, try to figure out what's going to work.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out the size difference between what China landed on the
Yeah.
surface. So that was it's like my kid's drivable Jeep. Okay, like my kids have one of those Jeeps they can drive with the little battery. Okay, that's about right. All right, maybe a little bit bigger than that. Versus that's what China landed in 2020. And I saw the imagery. It was crazy. They had this crazy off ramp that looked just so complex, so complex. It seems like there was a million points of failure. Of course, I have no idea how it works, but it just was fascinating to me to see the images that they released. Versus what we landed, MSL and 2020, those are the size of my Atlas VW, my VW Atlas. Like it's a huge car. Like it's a think of your Explorer, your Expedition, like that's the level that we're talking about.
Yeah,
And also depending on what you're carrying, right? Because if we have on MSL and on 2020, we have the capability for truly a laboratory where there's like 7 different instruments on these rovers, and all of those are very carefully calibrated. Think about the optics on some of those that Mike Ressler has to deal with. And so the way we used to land these things when they had these landers, you just bounce them on the surface, you'd ruin any calibration that you had. You'd probably break a couple of the instruments on the way down, right? You couldn't have this huge platform full of these just precision instruments and land it that way. And that's why we had to come up with a new concept for Sky Crane.
Yeah, just looking, so the weight of the Chinese Mars rover is about 240 kilograms. The weight of Perseverance is about 1,000 kilograms, so about 5 times, right? The difference, right? So people say when they design missions, right, one of the big variables is mass that drives a lot of the design.
Yeah.
And but all that said, congratulations to the Chinese.
Oh, absolutely,
team
right?
and their success. It's
U.S.
great.
is no longer the only ones, right?
Amazing. It's nice to be the only ones that could do that, but
Yeah.
Yeah. Other nations have tried and failed to land on Mars, and
friendly
including the United
competition is
States.
good.
Yeah.
Well, talking about trying and failing, one question is.
Oh, you can ask me that.
For you.
I don't know if you want to answer it, but I'm going to read it anyway. It says several years ago, there was a mission upset, which is another word for failure, I believe, due to a mismatch of metric and imperial units. When was this? Was there any QA and QC, quality control and quality assurance, I believe, right? Involved at that time? And what corrective actions came out of that incident?
Yeah, Mark.
If you had to kill me, then
first
don't
of all,
answer it.
I was not involved in that myself. Okay, that was not. So, absolutely yes, that's what happened, and there were failures, and we lost the mission. Yeah, huge deal, of course. And it was Mars 98, the Mars Climate Orbiter, and it did not go into orbit around Mars like it was supposed to. And it was traced to this mistake, this error that was made, and how they calibrated the thrusters that would then put it into orbit, and where they were tracking the hit point, the insertion point. They made some mistakes there, and from my perspective, since it's part of what I do is investigate anomalies, small ones and big ones like this one, although it wasn't part of this investigation. But it's fascinating to look at that problem and say, okay, so there was a mistake with the calibration of the thrusters and the units that were used, and how did that propagate to a mission failure, and how was it made in the first place? And you don't have something major like losing a mission with just one little mistake. where the data table that calibrates the thrusters didn't have units attached to it. It just had numbers. And somebody assumed that the units were SI units, and they weren't. They were Imperial units. And so when it was calibrated, and so but how did that not get? How did they not do that? You know, so I always tell students that I'm talking to that make sure you include your units with your number, because otherwise it's meaningless. But what were the human failures that came from that? How we were in what we call the faster, better, cheaper era for NASA exploration, trying to do things on more science on less money. And how did that play into this, which was a factor? How much was the testing that was done? How much was the pressure on the team, the operations team, to keep their staff small? What role did that play? All those things got investigated because of this, and NASA's a different agency as a result. JPL is a different place because of what we learned, and it was a very tragic day, very bad day at JPL when that happened from our standpoint.
So Mark, I feel like we should tell the students who are listening that if they get marked down on their math test because they forgot the units, now you know why.
Exactly.
There are consequences that for that. So
yeah.
Well, thank you for being very candid about that explanation. I really appreciate that. Well, you know what? I have a number of technical questions, faith-related questions. I want to be respectful of your time. I think we are already an hour, or if not more. I mean, you guys are really talking. For scientists and engineers, you talk too much. You talk like pastors. So I thought I could get up. I don't know. So there are the two more questions I'm dying to ask, unless you want to jump into, because you have the questions already. So if you really want to, now I want to take it, right? I think we have covered almost all of them. So let me ask you this. Again, faith-related question. I thought you did a very good job at the in-person session, and if people haven't watched it, the video is already available on YouTube. And again, it was a very frank conversation about how you balance faith and science and your family, everything. That was probably the best thing that came out of that in-person session. So there are a number of questions, which is probably the extension of that question or that issue, but I don't think it's particularly relevant right now. And also more technical questions. But let me ask you this on a positive note. What do you think will be the role of NASA and JPL in the future when commercialization of space is becoming more and more popularized? That I thought was a culturally relevant question. Yeah.
I'll give you my answer as a scientist. Industry is really good at things where you do it over and over and over again. So if you want to fly 10,000 communication satellites to annoy astronomers by all those little pinpoints of light at night, industry is really good at doing that kind of stuff. JPL and similar research agencies, so I'm not going to say JPL is unique in this, but we're really good at things that you do it exactly one time. Because that's what industry is not good at. It's really expensive to create something new. And that's what we're good at. We have people like Mark who look over our shoulders and make sure we're doing things according to best practices. We have engineers who are able to think outside the box, so to speak, come up with new solutions that crazy scientists like me say, hey, what if we do this? And they'll tell us why we can't, and then figure out how to do it anyway. But it's that one of a kind stuff that we're really good at. But if you want to build 3 or 4 of them, then industry's better at it. So there's room for everything depending on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I totally agree, Mike. I've worked with a lot of the commercial people. So I've had a couple of payloads go up on SpaceX. And it's just a very different culture. So I will say the role for commercial is awesome, because NASA contracts those people to build a lot of that stuff. So that means we can fly stuff more often. We can spend our time designing cool instruments and payloads and then just outsource who launches it, right? That's our current model for how we get to the space station, is we're utilizing the commercial crews. So without them, we wouldn't have a way to get to the space station right now, which is really important, I think. But I will say what comes with that secret sauce of JPL and other NASA centers, where we can do these like ridiculous things like invent sky crane, and just go Google the sample caching system on Mars 2020. It's so complex. It is so complex. The complexity has complexity, and it's just insane what we designed and that it works. And that really comes from the legacy people who are at these NASA centers, who, because people love NASA, you get people who've been there for 40 years, 50 years. They're just going to keep going until they can't anymore. And so with that comes just tremendous knowledge and wisdom of how to do these things that you don't find in the commercial industry, because these people
how to not do things.
Yeah, right.
I will say, I think when I was working at Johnson, I think the average age at Johnson Space Center was 54. JPL, the average age I think is closer to like 30 maybe. So there's a noticeable difference at JPL for me when I came here. But the point being, if you go to SpaceX, I think the average age is probably like 25, not joking. And I think a couple of their senior engineers I've met, they've been there for 5 years. You know, to earn that title at JPL, it's like 25 years, right? It's insane. So that depth of knowledge also makes a big difference.
Okay, so one last question. I didn't write this, but I always wanted to know. I was dying to ask this question, but somebody else asked. How can I work at JPL?
So Matthew, send us your resume.
The pastor thing doesn't work out.
We need a pastor at JPL.
Yeah, we do.
I think the question is, what is the procedure? Can I slip in my resume on a Sunday and you take it to take it?
I think one of the best ways to get a job at JPL is to do an internship. So those folks that are students or things like that, getting into the NASA centers and looking at JPL's summer program, it's been immense. So we've had 600, 700 students, sometimes in the summers, and it's very well organized, and they make connections, they can come back, and things like that. So that's a great way. And of course you can go to our website and search for jobs and things like that. But I think getting to know people at JPL and getting to build some relationships and network, I think is a really great way to get into the lab.
Yeah.
I think JPL and other NASA centers in general, I think it's like a 90% hiring rate out of the intern pool.
Yeah,
like 90%. I'm pretty sure is the number. Mark and Mike and Dan, did you guys all come through internships?
So that's not so true in the science, pure sciences.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, science is.
Yeah, we're off there somewhere else. But certainly, I know a lot of the engineering staff came through as interns.
I came in as a scientist, as a graduate student, and then I just networked my way into a job. But I was an intern first and foremost.
Well, yeah.
So actually, I'd like to answer one of the other questions that goes along with this, which was what subjects in high school that most prepared you for your career?
Yeah.
Because I'd like to get on this one. So, it's very obvious that math, physics, chemistry are the usual subjects that you have to have. But probably the one that I use the most, which I really hate to admit it, is the English and writing classes.
Writing. Yep.
Wow.
Because to survive at a place like
coming.
JPL, you have to be really good at writing proposals so that people give you funding to do the work that you really want to do. And then after you get the money and you do the research, you have to write it up and publish it so that the community knows what you're up to, so that you can write your next set of proposals. So as annoying as it is to the scientists, you really have to know how to write.
Yes, you do.
So thanks, Mrs. Miller. You did a great job.
I will also add, I
After
did a
that.
ton of theater in high school. And I didn't understand or appreciate how well that would prepare me for giving presentations to management all the time.
Wow.
So if you end up in systems engineering like I am, you're constantly throwing slides up in front of a bunch of really, really, really knowledgeable managers, and you better know what you're talking about and don't make it up. But also just to be able to publicly speak to them, right? And so actually doing years of theater helped me get over like stage fright, and so I don't get the jitters when I have to get up in front of people. And you have to do constant reviews throughout the life cycle of a project. So if you want to be as important as Mark or Dan someday, or Mike, then you have to be able to get up and give those presentations and have confidence in what you're saying.
Yeah, I've done 4 presentations in the last 2 days, by the way. So absolutely true. And I took a speech class at UCLA. I took a speech class in high school. Those were very important steps in that. Let me just say something about how I got my job too, because it was a God thing. I was grad school looking for jobs and had, from California, but I was in Philadelphia at the time and in grad school and had no clue what JPL was about, or that might even hire somebody like me. My advisor happened to know a JPL senior manager who happened to be in Philadelphia looking for someone with my skills. I mean, it's just completely, from a secular perspective, completely coincidental. And JPL flew me out for an interview, and I interviewed, and they gave me the job. And so I wasn't an intern, but it was definitely a God thing.
My route was so different that I would agree. The Lord put me where I want to be. Trust the Lord. He'll put you where you need to be.
Yeah. Well, I truly appreciate. Dan, were you going to say something?
No, I have to agree with all my colleagues that God puts you where he can use you, and where you can flourish. And I think we're all a good testimony of that. So.
Well, what a great note to end. And also, I thought it was very profound theologically, because that was the last answer I expected from you, that the power to articulate truth, right, using language is universally the most important thing. And theologically, we call it the ministry of logos, the word, right? In the beginning was the word was with God. The word is the meaning. I didn't see that coming from you guys, but that's very affirming in so many different ways. And that probably is our intersection in ministry. And you exemplify it in your everyday job. And I'm so humbled that I get to hang out with you every Sunday, even other days, and now over Zoom and all this conversation. And truly appreciate, on behalf of the congregation, on behalf of the kitchen table, you take time off your busy schedule to answer some of these questions. And I can't wait for you guys to come back to the kitchen table again. We will come up with other topics. And, as long as JPL is here, I hope you'll be here too. So thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Enjoyed this.